How are we doing today, guys? So, we are talking today about the bench press. Bench press is specifically focused around obviously creating a strong press and moving as much weight as possible from a locked position to touch the chest to obviously lock out again. Today we're going to be talking about going through the setup and all the cues related to around the setup. Then we're going to be talking about the movement itself in terms of cues that are associated to the actual movement, and then I'll demonstrate from there. First thing that we want to talk about are two things that quite dramatically will affect your ability to press and the strength around your press is the feet and the hands. So in terms of hand position, obviously when we're talking about specifics around sport, so powerlifting for example, you are forced to take a pause in the movement, but you also have rules around whether the heels can be on the ground or not, depending on the federation that you're in, as well as finger width in terms of how wide you can go. So a lot of powerlifters will deliberately go as wide as possible to allow themselves to shorten their range as much as possible. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing. Some people 100% definitely is. Other people it isn't, because the wider you go, the more internal rotation through your shoulder that you need, which means you may get pinching and things like that around the around the side or the front of the shoulder. So for all people, it's not necessarily to go wide, and that's not necessarily a good thing. By the same token, if you can and you're trying to compete in powerlifting, then it's probably a worthwhile benefit. But again, that's person specific. So a lot of hand positions and feet positions are determined by things like limb length, things like the person's size, as well as their capacity of movement inside their joint and around their limbs. So what we want to be thinking about here is creating a good setup position. So the setup is super crucial, mainly because the more consistently that you set up, the more likely you're going to hit the same shape every single time. Bench press is quite a finicky movement and quite a technical movement to be able to hit the same shape consistently. And if you do, you'll actually have significantly more success at being able to hit high loads consistently, which is obviously going to help drive performance. So what we want to be thinking about here is deliberately trying to build up a consistency around where you're setting up, both with feet, hands, as well as the rest of the body. So in terms of hand position, ideally, we want to be seeing the forearm being vertical or in line at the bottom of the rep. So for a lot of people, that's probably going to be inside what the widest possible grip is. But having said that, it entirely depends on your shoulder width, how long your arm is, or your upper arm in particular, as well as obviously your own personal capacities. So in general, that's where we're searching for, and that can be a good starting point to then move from, dependent on what you need to do. From there, we need to be talking about feet position. So you've got two main positions. I'm just going to move to the side of the bench so you can see my feet. Obviously, you've got a wider position. Now, this is typically favored by people who have thicker hips, a posterior chain dominant, who prefer to be able to basically hip extend into things. Or you've got people who obviously are a little bit more quad dominant, where a narrower foot position where the external rotation can be quite beneficial. Now, the big thing that changes here is that on the wide position, you'll typically see a vertical shin or even a posterior shin angle, a positive shin angle in terms of the ankle, from the ankle to the knees moving forwards, because that allows you to really drive into the heels. Whereas someone who's a bit more quad dominant is going to want to put their quads into that mid-range a lot more, and that's where, again, horizontal to further out is going to make much more beneficial to drive into the quads. Again, what I'd recommend is trying these two positions, seeing how they feel, and then go from there. I'll just quickly cue them in terms of the shapes. So if I'm lying on the bench for a wide position, I'll probably widen out to about where my squat width would be, or roughly around there. From there, the foot's more likely to sit straight or slightly rotated, just to allow capacity to continue to rotate out at the hips. Whereas if your feet are rotated, you're already end range external rotation, so you're not going to have that capacity, which will be relevant later on. If you're going narrow, the feet are most likely going to be quite externally rotated. The toes are probably going to be almost pointing sideways if you've got the capacity for that. And then from there, the heels are almost going to be touching, in this case, the end of the bench or just in front of that, so they're not going to have a big gap between them. This is going to allow you to really drive into that position, and as you can see, my shins are going to be angled further away from me versus the wide position where I'm going to be sitting in a position like this where my shin's probably horizontal, pulled back towards me. So that's what your hand position wants to be doing, that's what your feet want to be doing. Now I'm going to talk you through the full setup. Like I said, setup is important to get consistent, so try and make a routine that you set up the same way every single time. So I'm going to talk you through it as I do it. So sitting down on the bench, don't stress too much about anything right at the moment. From there, we're looking to create hand position first. So I'm going to deliberately put my pinkies around the ring. That's where I feel comfortable and where my shoulder position feels comfortable. From there, I'm going to deliberately make sure that my eyes are in front of the bar, which gives me space to extend into. From there, I'm going to set my feet into the shape that I want to be in. In my case, I'm going to pull back, because like I said, I like the wide position, and my heels are deliberately going to be off the ground. I can't actually get them there without lifting at the moment. So from there, gives me space to extend into, because remember, I'm going to be shifting back towards the bar. I'm going to hip extend, and I'm going to drive down on the bar with my lats, making sure to grip that bar tight, as a grip will have a significant difference on your ability to produce force. From there, I'm deliberately going to keep my ribcage pressed up using my lats, and I'm going to pull my tailbone back by externally rotating the knees to allow me to rest my hips on the bench. Now, I'm not collapsing on the bench, I'm literally just touching the bench, that way I can keep my leg drive and use my legs to drive my traps into the bench and keep my eyes underneath that bar. That's going to give me a really consistent position. That's also going to give me a lot of tension, a lot of stability to control the bar swinging from left to right, as well as up and down movement. Cool. So that's our setup. When we're talking about the movement itself, we want to be thinking about creating movement through the shoulder blade. This means that we're going to be creating an elbow bend, but it also means that we're going to be creating retraction and protraction of the shoulder. And it also means that we're going to be creating, this is shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, and relative internal rotation at the upper arm as we get down to the bottom of the rep. So we'll cue through that. So from there, obviously from my setup position, which I was just in, I'm going to be deliberately setting into my slightly protracted position. Now, reason for this is it gives space for me to retract into. If I'm holding myself up with my extension by using my shoulder blades to retract into it, to hold the chest up, it means I've got no space to move into, and you'll quite often get like impingements and stuff through the bicep, front of shoulder, things like that, where it's just going to feel uncomfortable because the shoulder blade is meant to move with the upper arm. They're meant to move together, not one locked in and the other one trying to move. So let them move together. Deliberately create space for you to move into, which will make the bottom position significantly easier to achieve. From there, having said that, what we want to be thinking about to create the arch is by using the erectors, so the two strips of muscle either side of the spine, all the way up from the neck, all the way down to the hip. We want to be using that entire musculature to hold that arch up, as well as the leg drive to hold it up, not the retraction itself. So, from that protracted position, we're going to be deliberately trying to create an elbow bend. From there, I'm going to hold my arch so that it mimics the shape. From there, we're going to be trying to deliberately create retraction, and I'm going to be trying to pull my chest towards that bar as I come down to the bottom. From there, the elbow should stay in line with the stacked wrist and the bar itself. And you notice that the touch point's going to be kind of about top or bottom of the sternum, which for most people is going to be about nipple height or like bra strap for a lot of women, in and around that sort of height. But again, it depends on the person, arm length, torso size, arch height, etc. From there, you're going to be thinking about driving out and initiating with the elbow, and from there pressing with the pec into protraction again. Now, when I protract, I'm not losing the arch. So I'm still arched here. I'm literally just creating a protraction through the shoulder blade. My rib cage does not collapse as I create that protraction. We want to keep that arch, keep that tension, keep that stability throughout the actual movement itself. So make sure that you're holding that position and you don't lose that shape. Okay, so that's what we're looking for when we're talking about the actual movement. Final thing that we want to talk about at that bottom position and the movement itself is the stack of the wrist. So when we're creating a stack, we're looking for the thumb to line up with the actual forearm itself, which means the knuckles will be slightly behind. Having said that, we don't want the knuckles sitting all the way back. This introduces another lever to the system and a point where the bar can move, particularly on heavy loads. It decreases stability, which will mean you'll be trying to crank into external rotation to try and press towards the head rather than driving straight up. so it reduces the mechanical efficiency of the movement. So what we want to be thinking about is stacking that wrist. That's also why it's important to have a tight grip, because the flexors here will stop it from collapsing backwards. If you've got a loose grip, it's always going to collapse back. From there, we want to be thinking about stacking that position over the top of the elbow in the bottom position. And that's going to, again, create the best mechanical drive and best joint angles to drive you vertically up. Okay, so let's do a couple of reps and just talk that through so you can see the movement in full. So if I do a full setup from the bottom, relaxing, I'm not worried too stressed about anything at the moment. From there, I'm going to set my hands, make sure my eyes are below the bar. From there, I'm going to set the feet in. Then I'm going to make sure the traps are on the bench. From that point, I'm going to use my hips to extend, drive the heel to the ground, and from there I'm going to pull down on the bar with the lats and slide myself underneath that bar so my eyes are underneath the bar. From that point, I'm actually going to lift the bar out and use my hips dropping down to let myself shift away from the bar. So I'm going to press out, protract slightly, pull my tailbone down to the seat, down to the bench. From there, my elbows initiate. From there, I'm trying to retract and pull my shoulder blades down towards the spine. I'm going to gently tap the shirt, not the chest. And then elbows initiate and protract. So, the crucial cue right at the bottom there was to say, make sure that I said, touch the shirt and not the chest. Basically coming down and being gentle with it. Too often you see people trying to use their rib cage as a springboard. At max reps, particularly in sports that don't require the pause, obviously powerlifting requires the pause, but in sports that don't require that, such as CrossFit for example, you can use that spring a little bit, and at some point, sometimes it can be advantageous, but to a minimal extent. If we're looking to train power through the triceps, train power through the pecs, we want to train to be strong through full ranges. If you're bouncing, you're not going to be training that position through the full range. So control it all the way down and power out of that shape. And only use that extra little bit when we're talking about really at max weights. So increase stability, that also increases stability. So that's our bench press component. If you have any more questions, feel free to message us. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed it.